Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Florida-friendly landscaping educational program. Today is a Friday lunch and learn, and what we are going to be discussing, while you eat lunch, I'll eat lunch later. Kind of hard to teach and eat lunch, and I didn't want to eat before because, could have stuff in my teeth or something. So I might go quickly the hungrier I get, but welcome to our Friday lunch and learn, and today we're going to discuss unwelcome guests in the garden, learning how to recognize some of Florida's invasive plants and learning more about what an invasive plant is. What exactly does that mean? I am Lilly Browning. I work for Hernando County Utilities in the Water Conservation Department. And here's an email that you can reach me. You can still use the old LillyB email, LILLYB at hernandocounty.us to reach me. But we're kind of guiding people towards this more generic email, which is longer, but Hernando County FFL at hernandocounty.us. Either of those places, you're going to reach me. And so you can, if you would like a PDF copy of this program or have any other questions, feel free to email me. Here are the 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping. And today we are going to be discussing with our unwelcome guests in the garden the opposite of right plant, right place, which is principle number 1. And it's wrong plant in the wrong place. We're going to turn that one around and discuss what happens when we are dealing with the wrong plant in the wrong place. Here's just a few of the plants. Well, I won't even talk about this fern, I don't think, or this Japanese wisteria, but they are other ones on the list. There's only so many we can cover in an hour. Sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, but we'll discuss that. But is there such a thing really as a bad plant? This is where we need to start this process, because I have other classes on this subject on Hernando County Government YouTube. Seductive invaders, pretty darn invasive plants, and where that place that we start from with that is, you become attached to your plants because they're very pretty and they're very seductive, and you're like, but they're so pretty, but this, but that. So we have to look at the whole picture. There are no bad plants. Nature didn't set out to create hostile plant life. Where did the plants go bad? No. What is the organism that brought these plants to being in the wrong place? Okay, sometimes maybe that could happen naturally over millennia. Maybe some seeds get stuck on an animal that's traveling, but the rate of speed in which some of these plants are being transported in the past, let's say, probably more than 100, 130, 140 years, is due to us. Yes, we are the ones who are disrupting the ecosystem by bringing plants to areas where they have no checks and balances. So, no, I don't have anything against any particular plant. The problem is they just happen to be the wrong plant in the wrong place. And yes, we're at fault for that, but we'll talk about, how to deal with that. First, I want to differentiate between an invasive plant and a normal everyday weed. What is the definition of a weed? A weed could be a native plant that someone has decided is a weed or not worthy of our adoration. The pollinators don't know that, though. The pollinators do adore them. So when we're talking about invasive plants, I'm not talking about your normal everyday weed. A weed is there are several definitions of that. One of them is a plant dealing with an unhappy person. My saying is a weed is a matter of opinion. It's just a plant that's growing where we don't want it to grow, usually in a lawn or flower bed. Again, not the plant's fault. Plant's doing what the plant was created to do. We're the ones who decided, well, I don't want you to be there. These are not the kind of plants we'll be discussing when we use the words invasive, even though they may seem aggressive to you, like this Biden's alba, this Spanish needle. It can be very weedy, very aggressive. It puts those stickers all over you or your dog. But I can't get rid of it. Well, it's a native, for one thing. And yes, it's aggressive, but I just try and manage it so that there is always some, but it's not taking over everything in my flower bed. Why? Because look at it. I can't go out there and not see a pollinator on that plant. So, you know, it has tremendous value. I think it even has tremendous, maybe medicinal value. That's a different subject that I don't get into, but I know that people, you know, do keep it around for those reasons. Here's just some other everyday weeds we have in Florida. This is Florida pusley. You may see it in your yard. No real big deal. Florida betony, again, no real big deal. This is also called rattlesnake plant. If you pull it up, that's like a rattle shaped tuber. People eat that. It's like a radish. You know, a lot of good benefits. You may hate this dollar weed, but it is also just a native weed. And I've seen it growing literally in the water. I mean, look at them. They look like lily pads for a reason. Keep that in mind. They look like lily pads for a reason. This dollar weed or pennywort. What do lily pads float on? The water. If you see this, if your lawn is loaded with this, that lawn's getting too much water, one way or another. That's a little tell there. This has many names. This is the weed of many names. Down here, matchhead weed is one of them. We'll go with a simple one first. Looks like little match heads. This can be like a mat all through your lawn. Turkey tangle fog fruit is its other name. Or it gets shortened to fog fruit, or it can actually be frog fruit. Whatever it is, it's all over my lawn and I love it because it attracts 3 different types of tiny little butterflies and it's a great addition to my yard. So when I'm talking about invasive plants, which we'll spend the rest of this class talking about, I'm not talking about your everyday weeds, which happen to be native plants here in Florida. Let's define invasive. What is an invasive plant? Well, here's the words from the Invasive Plant Species Council, formerly known as the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, or FLEPC. They have changed their names. They're trying to do away with the word exotic simply because, for several reasons, I guess, they don't want to say that in certain situations, a native plant can't become maybe overly aggressive in a certain area. Also, they don't want to give a bad name to all exotic plants because many of them are what we call very well-behaved exotic plants. So they changed their name to Florida Pests or Florida Invasive Plant Species Council. And they say invasive plant, what is that term? It means it describes exotic plants thriving outside of cultivation. Well, you say, well, some of those native weeds do that too, but let's finish. Expanding into natural areas. Well, some of the weeds do that too. Well, let's finish. And disrupting native plant communities. Our native weeds are going to, on a large scale, disrupt any native plant communities. They're part of the native plant communities. So the National Invasive Species Council defines invasive species as a species that is a non-native to the ecosystem that is under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or even harm to human health. I don't know any of these Florida species that is, harming human health, other than many of them you shouldn't eat. I don't know what plants you should eat and not eat, but they can harm human health once they also become maybe attractants to more invasive insects, or impede, us being able to have access to crops or water, things such as that. So the National Invasive Species Information Center also says these plants are characteristically adaptable to new habitats. They grow aggressively and have a high reproductive capacity. They are often introduced to a new location without the environmental checks and balances where they came from, such as seasonal weather, diseases, or insect pests that kept them under control in their native range. So that's what happened. Most likely, we, the human race, were involved in moving them from where nature put them and where there were checks and balances so that they weren't taking over everything. And you bring them to a new area where we outpace evolution, all the time. So they may grow fabulously here. They do grow fabulously here, but there's nothing to keep them in check. Their vigor, combined with a lack of natural enemies, often leads to outbreak populations. This is according to FLEPC, that's the old name. These populations explosions can have catastrophic effects, outcompeting and displacing the native plants. None of our native weeds are going to do that in a large scale. Maybe right in your yard you think they are, but on a large scale they don't outcompete or displace native plants. And disrupting naturally balanced native plant communities. Destruction and replacement of our native plants by invasive species has several significant consequences. And this is the major one. Wildlife that depends on native plants is often unable to adapt. Some are, some aren't, and may be forced to leave the area or die out. So control of invasive plants in Florida's natural areas and waterways is also very expensive, costing millions, probably more than millions of dollars each year, especially a lot of those aquatic invasive plants. So what do we have here? What is the definition of a noxious weed? So here we have another definition to come up with. The definition of a noxious weed, that is a federal definition, or state and federal regulated invasive plants. So from the Plant Protection Act of 2000, any plant or plant product that can directly or indirectly injure or cause damage to crops, very important. That means nursery stock or plant products, livestock, poultry, or other interests of agriculture, irrigation, navigation through the waterways, the natural resources of the United States, the public health, or the environment. If that is a danger to any or more of those things, then it gets labeled as a noxious weed, and there are state and federal laws regarding those particular plants. So as I said, how did they get here? I already have commented that, well, they got here because we humans were the ones who brought them here. So they got here as seeds and weeds in imported nursery plants and soils, as misidentified or unknown plants from aquarium keepers, water gardeners, landscapers, and their friends. as whole plants or fragments in ballast water from foreign ships entering our ports. Bring in a lot of invasive insects that way as well. Or as fruits and flowers brought home as souvenirs by travelers. They're trying to, you know, they keep a pretty good watch on that. That's why all those cute little beagles are in, you know, the airports in, you know, with the international flights, to make sure you're not sneaking any type of fruits or flowers out of the country. Cross-country travelers, I just added this because I've started some camping with a camper, travel trailer. And even I've noticed, you know, thinking there's no real way to keep every bit of plant life or soil, you know, out of the bottom of that travel trailer. And you multiply me by billions of people, or even just riding around cars. We're a mobile society. So, you know, you stop at a rest stop, you pick something up on the bottom of your shoe, it gets in your car, you go to the next place, you get out, you walk around, you have placed it somewhere else. So, you know, like I said, we're pretty guilty with our mobile society. Or on boat trailers, these aquatic plants, propellers, dive gear, or in bait wells, anything that moves around. So the Florida Invasive Species Council has 2 categories, and I just checked this morning to make sure that these categories are listed correctly for these plants. So we're going to start with category 1, except I have shimmied one category 2 plant in the category 1 category because there's a reason. I'll tell you when we get there. But what do we mean when we talk about Florida Invasive Species Council's category 1 invasive plants? Those are plants that alter native plant communities by disrupting native species, changing community structures or ecological functions, or hybridizing with natives. That happens a lot, probably way more than, you know, we want to know, really. Even some of our native wildflowers, we may be beyond the point of knowing if they've been hybridized with non-natives or not. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get native flowers. Just, you know, realize that we're doing the best we can do, but these are the things that are happening. Let's talk with number 1 in the category 1, and I'm going to show you the next 2 because they are the only 2 on my list that in Hernando County, if you have these 2 trees on your property, you are mandated to remove them. There's no other plant on this list where anybody that I am aware of is saying, get it off your property and dispose of it. In other places, possibly. So I guess what I'm saying is these are the 2 that if you have them on your property, you got to get them off. And there are, you know, very specific ways to do that. The others, no one's going to come and point at you and say anything, but, you know, it would be kind of self-regulating because we know you're here because you do care about the environment and you want to be educated as the best way to protect it. So this Brazilian pepper, it is banned by Hernando County ordinance. And what does that mean? Because some things I'm going to have in red here where either by state, usually a state agency, is going to say, see down at the bottom, it says you can't possess, propagate, sell, or transport this plant. So, but like I said, in Hernando County, you can't have it on your property. It is a native to Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. It's in the sumac family, has bright red berries, go down I-4, headed south in the wintertime. That whole wall of plant life, that's what they are, these Brazilian peppers. They live about 35 years. They were brought here on purpose in the nursery trade way back in the mid 1800s, and, you know, sold as Florida holly or Florida Christmas holly, something like that, which to me is very silly because we have plenty of native, beautiful Florida hollies. But anyway, that's what happened. And so regulated by FDACS, what is that? Florida Department of Agriculture and Community Services. So they say possession, propagation, sale, or transport is regulated. You would have to have a special permit to do it. Your regular everyday citizen is not going to be allowed to do it. Now, I threw a category 2 in our category 1 list simply because I wanted to keep Brazilian pepper and lead tree together in your mind, because those are the 2 that in Hernando County, you're not allowed to have on your property. If you have it on your property, you want to get rid of it. And you may be saying, well, if it's only a category 2, why is Hernando County up in arms about it? Again, each, certain areas are going to have larger populations and it's going to be more of a problem. That's what's happening here in Hernando County. So both of these, most likely, your Brazilian pepper tree and your lead tree, you are more likely to have a problem with it if you live west of 19. There are a few patches of it east of 19. So I'm talking to our coastal residents, and Brazilian pepper and lead tree, if code enforcement finds it on your property, they're going to tell you you have to remove it. The lead tree has this, it's leguminous, and it will also have long bean pod type things, all full of seeds, which spread tremendously. It forms dense thickets. It only gets to be about 16 feet tall. It naturalizes quickly. Those seed pods have 20 seeds that spreads by wind, birds, cattle, fire. However, this should be read here. The possession, propagation, sale, and transport is regulated by our state agency, our Florida Department of Agriculture. So those are the 2 that if you have them in your yard, someone will eventually come by and say you must remove it. That's not going to happen with any of the rest of these, at least not yet. But like I said, we're here because we want to know these things. We want to know what is the most ecological friendly thing to do. This is a punk tree. Most likely, you're not going to have that up here in Hernando County. It's more in the southern counties, a melaleuca tree. This was introduced to the Everglades to help dry them up for agricultural and development purposes. Did a fabulous job helping dry up the Everglades, and really got out of control. So it is a native to Australia. Now these plants, again, I mentioned, they're not bad plants. That Brazilian pepper has nice attributes to beekeepers. Beekeepers love the honey that is produced from the bees visiting Brazilian pepper. Melaleuca, I'm not sure what lead tree might have, but Melaleuca, as we know, has wonderful medicinal value in the oil. It smells horrible, but it has great medicinal value. And it is also valued by beekeepers. It's attractive to birds and bats. So it might have some good qualities, but those good qualities don't outweigh the damage that they're doing overall. This you can actually help with, even though they may not be a problem here, you can help with, you can help the state by purchasing Melaleuca mulch. It's been heat treated, in a nice plastic bag. I think it goes under Flora mulch. You can find it in a big box store. So therefore you are helping provide an industry that will help, get rid of some of these Melaleuca trees or punk trees. All right. This is something we do have, don't we? And boy, do we have this skunk vine. The reason I am adding the Latin names here, you can ignore them if you want, but it does become important sometimes in differentiating a problem plant from a non-problem plant, and sometimes it's just a matter of a slight species, a slight variation change. So that's where the Latin names come in handy. Plus the Florida invasive species, I'm trying to remember their new name. The Florida Invasive Species Council also will list the names in alphabetical order by Latin name. So, that helps having them written here. This skunk vine. There are urban legends out there about lots of things. There are urban legends out there about how that the University of Florida created love bugs. They did not. They came up naturally from South America through Texas to us, getting to us in about the 40s. So there are urban legends about many things. If you have heard that skunk vine was begun, not begun, but that it got out of control at a USDA field station in Brooksville, Florida in 1897, you will have heard the truth. That actually did happen. So we have to own that one. A USDA field station was studying it as a fiber crop, and I always thought that meant like rope, but somebody recently was telling me that it can be used as an herb. So maybe they meant edible. I don't know. I wouldn't go around eating skunk vine. It is native to Asia. It will grow flowers if you let it get that far. This is, I wouldn't even begin to tell you how to control it. I think you can just slightly control it. You're never going to eradicate it. If you have it, which most of you probably do. I actually don't. I moved to the northwest corner of Hernando County, and I say I don't. I've lived there 15 years. I'm beginning to find little tiny pieces of it. But I purposefully brought nothing from my other house, which was in downtown Brooksville, and was very picky about accepting other plants from other people where it might have come from. So I'm sure neighbors and stuff have maybe brought it in, or maybe I did accidentally bring it in a plant I bought, but it's under control at the moment. But when you have it everywhere, it gets through your lawn. It'll just go all through your lawn. You have to mow your lawn. And you know what happens when you mow your lawn? Any tiny piece of this plant will produce a new plant. So it's very, very difficult. And I'm not here today to suggest chemicals or control methods. I'm just, helping you ID them. But we'll talk about at the end where you can find out some of that information. This, I just consider it, when I lived in an area, a yard that had a lot of it, it's just stress relief. Just go out and pull it all the time. Consider it stress release. Another invasive is this wild taro. And you may be like, oh, really? That's an invasive? Yes, especially along our water's edges. It's native to India. They brought it here in the 1900s. I've never seen it get 9 feet tall, but I guess it can. It was used, the tubers were used as a food crop for enslaved people. It, looked very similar to what they had in Africa and the Caribbean and places like that. It grew, the percentage of how much this is in our waterway, grew a great bit between 1983 and 2008, started really taking over. So that is one of the issues there. This one, ranchers, it is the bane of their existence, this tropical soda apple. And this picture doesn't show the fruit. The fruit is round, but it looks like a tiny watermelon. Has those kind of stripes and things on it. Cattle think it's candy. They love the fruit. They get past these horrible thorns, to get to that fruit. So if they're going to eat it, what else are they going to do with it? Exactly. And so that's how it gets spread around. You know, it's from native to Brazil and Argentina. Only showed up here that we're aware of in 1988. Already has infiltrated 1 million acres of pasture, sod farms, forests, ditches, causing $6.5 to $16 million worth of control measures annually. Its root system can be 3 to 6 feet deep. So again, possession, propagation, sale, or transport is regulated not only by the state of Florida, but by the federal government as well. Now, aside from Brazilian pepper and lead tree, when I say possession here, don't freak out and think, I have skunk vine all over my yard, and you know, they say I can't possess it. What it means there is probably with intent to continue to propagate, you know, or even sell, not that you happen to have these weeds in your yard and you are trying your best to control them. Water hyacinth is beautiful as this plant is. I don't know of anyone who says, oh, but that's a beautiful plant. Usually it gets a very bad name because it clogs up waterways like you wouldn't believe. You know, it can be 200 tons in weight of this that covers 1 acre on the water. And it was introduced as a beautiful aquarium or water pond plant in New Orleans in 1884. It spread around through the aquarium. Trade populations can double in less than 6 days on our waterways. So again, by the state regulators, possession, propagation, sale, and transport is regulated by those. Here's one, I'm sure, another one that you are probably very familiar with. It's another thing I don't have out in the Royal Highlands. Good, you know, some of the being closer maybe to the coast and having that dry sand pine area. We have our invasive plants, but not quite these, but that like inland downtown Brooksville has plenty of these air potatoes. They have these beautiful heart-shaped leaves. It was brought in, you know, as a ornamental plant in 1905. It can reproduce via these tubers, these potatoes, which are not poisonous, but nor are they palatable. And I know over the years, different groups have tried to like have contests to say, let's figure out how we can make this an edible product. They failed. No one wanted to eat anything that they created out of it. They can grow 8 inches in a day, sure, in the summer. They can grow vegetatively as well as from these roots. The good thing is, or these tubers, the good thing is it does freeze in the winter, and that is a good time to look for these tubers and collect them, to throw them away. Another good thing is, I'd say 9 years ago or so now, we started with the University of Florida's help, releasing air potato beetles that have done a good job in keeping these under control. They're not going to eradicate them because these beetles are vetted. Don't freak out when I say we have beetles eating, you know, this particular weed, because it was vetted for 10 or 12 years beforehand to make sure it won't eat anything else. They gave it close relatives. And people have told me, you mean this insect will die before it eats something else? Yes, it will. I mean, but what they do is they don't eat the entire population of air potatoes, because then they want to go and have babies and they want something to feed those babies, but they do keep it down. And what they end up doing is skeletonizing the leaves. You may see little holes in them, and then eventually just like you'll just see the vein structure. That's all you'll see, so that they can't photosynthesize. And I think they've done a really good job in that this is not the monster that it used to be. but they have tested those air potato beetles, close relatives of air potatoes, other yum type things, wouldn't touch them, wouldn't eat them. Then they, get further away from, they just tried everything. And they even tried things that were completely non-related, but important crops to the United States, such as corn, soy, sorghum, all those things. No, wouldn't touch them. So they were very well vetted before they were released in Florida. Here's another bane. It used to be just of the ranchers. Now it's everyone's existence. Just, when you go out today, look on the side of the road, you'll find this Kogan grass. Was actually brought in as for soil stabilization in the 30s and 40s. I bet if you're from up north, there's another plant you can think of that, was brought in for the same thing. It was even touted as a miracle plant, that it was going to help stabilize the soil and stop erosion. And that was kudzu, which is a major problem up north. Not really a problem here. We have a few patches of kudzu in Hernando County, but it won't leave like outside of half an acre. It's not an issue here. Plenty of other things are. So, we've got plenty to worry about. And this Kogan grass is one of them. Naturalizes quickly. You have to go through a routine of, it says dig down to rhizomes, then treat new growth with herbicide. Do that multiple times. I've even seen some people who do a burn and then treat. Burn it out, wait for the new growth, treat it. I'm not here to tell you what herbicides to be used. I'll send you, if you need to know about that, I'll send you where to find out that information at the end. So the possession, propagation, sale, and transport is regulated not only by state, but by federal agencies. Now, some of these that I'm going to bring to you, you're going to be like, what? It's in my yard. What are you talking about? No, I'm not making these up. I just didn't sit down and say, well, I don't like this plant, so I'm going to add it into the program today. No, these, it's a category 1, and we explained what that definition was. So your regular old Ligustrum sinense, your Chinese privet here. It's native to China, brought in 1852. It can produce hundreds of fruit. And again, the possession, sale, and transport is regulated by FDEX. Don't be concerned if you have it as a shrub in your yard and you bought your house that way. But as it starts to, not look so great or anything, might want to replace it with something else. Old world climbing fern. It becomes a problem in many places. It's native to Asia and Australia. There's freely branching leaf fronds, which may reach 100 feet long. This one is regulated by state and federal authorities as well. Mimosa trees. And yes, they're pretty. I'm not saying they're not pretty. It's a native to China. Brought here way back in 1745, or at least to the south. It reproduces vegetatively and by seed. It takes advantage of disturbed areas. I see it all along the roadsides up in the Royal Highlands where I live. In fact, one time my husband pointed them out and he goes, "That's a pretty tree. Should we bring one to our yard?" No, no, we should not. That's why, a lot of times we see something growing all on its own. We want to get excited. We want to call it a native plant. We want it to be native. We want it to be a great find. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that can't happen. I have run across native plants that have volunteered and grown themselves places. But you really got to start asking some questions. Is it growing by itself and there's nothing like that? Nobody put it there, you really have to question. It could very well be an invasive plant. Look at this pretty plant. Isn't that gorgeous? Called coral ardesia. It escaped cultivation. I like those words. And you just picture the plant like running away. Escaped cultivation in 1982. It can be 6 feet high, bright red berries. Again, possession, propagation, sale regulated by state authorities. I have seen entire wooded lots, undeveloped wooded lots covered in this coral ardesia. Because just think, the berries are going to drop and spread. The berries are going to be eaten and redeposited elsewhere by birds. So some people confuse this with a native called wild coffee. Wild coffee doesn't have quite the red berries like that. I've only seen like white flowers. Maybe it has some red berries, but also has much, much, much wider and deeply veined leaves and without the scalloped edges. When you see them right next to each other, they're pretty easy to tell apart. Australian pine. Now, I've heard from people who they say, well, when I was growing up in Florida, like along the coast in Pinellas County, we sat under picnic tables under these Australian pines. They were so wonderful. They're so beautiful. They provided so much shade. Well, they were planted in the late 1800s as a windbreak and as for shade. We have a coastal community here that has quite a bit of them. They create these dense canopies. They have very, 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 very shallow root systems. So through our storms, they're not a great windbreak. The only windbreak advantage they have is that the wind will break them. Because their roots are so shallow, and so then they're also so huge, so it brings up a whole lot of earth with it, disturbing the nesting sites of many types of animals, sea turtles and American crocodiles. To show you how thick it is, I took this picture. Can you see a person in there? Look closely. I wasn't very far from her. There she is. She's bent over, picking up trash. It was on a coastal cleanup day. That's her hat, her body, her arm there. That just shows you how thick, thick thickets that these Australian pines can cause. And most of these invasive plant life, it's in its nature to grow quickly. So if it's in its nature to grow quickly, that also means weak in storms. So let's move on to category 2, invasive plants. The definition of those are invasive exotics that have increased in abundance or frequency, but have not yet altered Florida plant communities to the extent shown by Cat 1 species. So by now they know the patterns. So they can't quite come out and say, I don't have proof that it's altering, the native plant communities and the native wildlife, but I think it's acting like it will. So basically a category 2 is for the Florida Invasive Species Council to say this to those plants. Watching you. I'm watching what you're doing. So keep that in mind when you choose the plants for your landscape. China berry tree all over Spring Hill. Oh my gosh, they're everywhere. They were introduced in the 1700s as an ornamental plant shade tree or for fuel wood. It does naturalize quickly. It also forms those dense thickets, gets 50 feet tall. I'm not sure, but I think this one might be one that in the early summer, one of these invasive trees produces flowers that smell like lilacs. So talk about being seductive or intoxicating, that might be very difficult for some people to say. oh man, I can't get rid of that. But consider the long-term consequences. What is this word at the bottom here of this list? Allelopathic. What does that mean? Many plants have allelopathic chemicals. Basically means they emit a chemical that kills any other plant life around them that is not themselves. So if you have that China berry tree and don't have any grass growing under it, it's not just the shade, it's actually emitting like an herbicide that says nobody but me can grow here. And you can see that that could tend to be very problematic in our woodland areas. Here's another one that might surprise you, this coral vine, sometimes called coral love vine. It's, showing invasive tendencies. So the Invasive Species Council was like, I'm watching you, you coral vine. It's native to Mexico, fast growing vine. It naturalizes quickly, can grow, up to 25 feet tall, and it spreads by seeds and underground tubers. Anything that has multiple ways of spreading is something they really want to keep their eyes on. This was in my cover page for the category 2s. Golden rain trees. Beautiful, beautiful trees. I'm not going to tell you they're not beautiful, especially in the fall. You get to have these yellow leaf structures and then these salmon colored bracts in fall in Florida. But as you know, if you have a golden rain tree, you have seeds all over the place. Something you may not know, and how I can convince you maybe that you don't want your golden rain tree, and you may not have ever associated these two things with each other. If you have a golden rain tree, or your neighbor does, spring comes around and you have millions and millions and millions of little black and red bugs. I'm a psychic, aren't I? You're going to say, how did you know I have those bugs every spring? I know because you have the golden rain tree, and those are called Jadera bugs, Jadera, and they are eating the seeds of your golden rain tree. They're actually helping you out so we don't have, a world full of golden rain trees. But if you don't want those bugs coming every spring, don't have the golden rain tree. That's the answer to that. Now I'm going to talk about category 1 invasive plants found in nurseries and garden centers. And this, people get mad. Like, what? It's not fair. This game is not played fairly if I can go to a store and buy something and then you tell me it's an invasive plant. Why does that happen? It has to do with the government regulations. If these plants do not have that red writing that says the sale and transport and propagation is regulated by the state for whatever reasons, they haven't done that yet. And I'm sure they have their criteria that they have in their matrices that they have to go through. So you can walk into a store and purchase one that, has been known to cause problems. It's just they're not federally or statewide regulated yet. You get mad at me about this Mexican petunias, aren't you? But we're going to talk about them. Now, to be fair, these say these are purple showers, which is a UF developed version of Mexican petunia that is supposed to be a sterile cultivar. So let's talk about these Mexican petunias. Yep, you can go to the store and buy them right now. You can go to your neighbor's house and see them growing right now. Try to get that sterile cultivar. If you absolutely have to have them, just understand they're still almost like in the testing phase. We don't know how sterile they're going to be, or if they're not going to hybridize with some of our good old-fashioned invasive Mexican petunias. They do tolerate a wide range of conditions. They spread by seed, rhizomes, stem sprouts, and cuttings. 15 years ago, when I bought my house, it's what the builder planted there in this silly little area in front of my garage. That is like an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I mean, it might be bigger than that, but that's all there is. That's just dirt. I love plants. I love soil, but I don't know why that just wasn't paved like everything around it. But anyway, they had Mexican petunias growing in there. I pulled them out knowing about their invasive potential. 4 years worth of pulling out the tubers that kept trying to grow up there before I finally got rid of them in that tiny enclosed area. So, just something to put in your mind. You're gonna get mad at me again, aren't you, with the lantana? They attract butterflies. Yeah, they do. But let's look at the bigger picture again. They're a weed in citrus groves. They spread all over the place. You'll find them in disturbed areas on edges of undeveloped lots. They are toxic to cattle. They want to eat them because they taste good, but they'll bring a cow down. If they're going to bring a cow down, what are they going to do to your dog? It's another thing to think about. There's 12,000 fruits per plant. There is a native lantana that you can purchase. Its Latin name has escaped me. It's lantana, obviously not Camara. There's a purple trailing one that's not as invasive, but there's also just a plain yellow, not these mixed colors, lantana. So if you must have lantana, try very, very hard to get the native variety. This is another one. You may have this in your yard, and they grow really big. And camphor trees, it has great medicinal value. That's where you get camphophenique and all those, wonderful things for colds and stuff. But you also, they grow big like an oak tree, but quickly. Again, remember what happens if a tree grows quickly. Do you really want a fast-growing, humongous tree in your yard during storm season? Another thing to think about. And I've had, a close friend who's very much a nature lover tell me that, nothing is really would make her move her camphor tree from her front yard because there's owls and other things in there. But on the long-term way of looking at it, in the, natural lands, it is displacing endangered species. There was a time in the 1875-ish, there's an old stump of one left at the Chinsegat Conservation Center, not the plantation house or I'm sure they have plenty there too, but down the road at the conservation center, like an old stump of one. And that used to be in front of a house there. And what would happen then in the 1800s is if you had the money to buy an exotic plant and you had someone who could go to the port of Tampa and pick it up in a wagon and bring it all the way up to North Brooksville, you were someone with a lot of money. Therefore, you wanted to show that tree off. That was a specimen, woo, look at me. And then what's happened? It's taken over and becomes an invasive species. And you very well know every time you mow your lawn, you're mowing over thousands of tiny little baby camphor trees. So just another thing, I know it's expensive to remove a large tree, but, at least have someone come out and see if it might be a danger to your property. This Japanese honeysuckle is not really a big issue here in Florida. I was in Virginia recently. Boy, I can see how it's invasive there. It's just everywhere in a natural area where I was. Do the bees love it? Absolutely. Do butterflies like it? I'm sure. Do kids like to take the stamen out, like we always used to do? Is the smell part of our childhood? Yes. But when it takes over a, wooded area so nothing else can grow, then we have issues. It's native to Japan, brought in 1906. It is an opportunistic invader, and it does outcompete native plants. You know what? You can get a native honeysuckle that has red tubular flowers that I think is a lot prettier, called coral honeysuckle. You can get that instead. Here's one you may be like, what? Come on now. You're just going to my yard and picking every plant that I have. I'm really not. And even if you keep this asparagus fern in a pot, say it won't spread if I keep it in a pot, it's sticky, isn't it? Some squirrel or something is going to rub across it and spread it elsewhere. Or the birds are going to eat the fruit and spread it elsewhere. So another thing to think about. Chinese tallow tree. Look how gorgeous that is. Just beautiful. And I've had people say, nope, 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 it's my fall color. I refuse to get rid of it. It has the fruit from August to November. They have made soap from the seeds and the oil from the seeds. It was brought here in the 1700s, but it naturalizes quickly, has a very, very long tap root. It, has taken over. I mean, if something can grow in a sidewalk like that, then we need to really, worry about it might not have those natural checks and balances. This is like the air potato and the skunk vine. You're looking at me like, how do you expect me to get rid of that? I probably don't, but we can at least try and manage it. And it's difficult. That this is where it's very, very, very important to have the correct Latin name, because some of the ferns are not a problem, maybe even native. So you got to look up the Latin name here, the cordifolia. And another way to know that you have, sometimes it's called Boston fern. This is where you run into trouble, because some Boston ferns are just fine. So that's why you need to stick with the Latin names. If you have this growing out in your yard and you didn't put it there, chances are it is this. But just go out and pull it up. It pulls up easily. If you find one of these orange, several of these orange balls on the roots, you got it. That's the invasive sword fern. Here's another one. You're going to get mad at me. This is in my yard. This is in my mom's yard, whatever. I love Nandina. Love heavenly bamboo. Why are you picking on it? I'm not. I didn't make any of these up. This is, they have been noted by the Florida Invasive Species Council as being problem plants. And if you don't believe the invasive portion of this, know that those berries are poisonous to some birds. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, I don't know of any birds stupid enough to eat poisonous berries to them. But then think back to, remember how we're outpacing evolution? So this might be something new they want to try. There's that, but also the nature of some birds. Cedar waxwings. Ask any blueberry farmer. They come in huge flocks and just devastate a place with berries. So they will do that with these berries as well. And they eat so many of them, it builds up the toxicity to where it kills them. Keep those things in mind if you have any Nandina or heavenly bamboo. So what are we going to do? You're feeling overwhelmed right now. I just named every plant you might have in your yard. What are you going to do about these things? Well, take it one step at a time. Don't feel overwhelmed and just give up. Just do a little bit at a time. First thing you can do is don't buy invasive exotic plants. or invasive species. Educate yourself. That's what you're doing. Educate the plant centers. Remember, the customer is always right. Don't be nasty. Just if they hear it from enough people saying, I really wish you wouldn't sell that, you know, an asparagus fern is pretty much an invasive species. I just wish you wouldn't sell it. Be selective about free plants that anyone wants to give you. Educate yourself. If you have them, dispose of them properly. That means dig them up, bag them up with your household trash to throw them away, and manage them. And we're going to use IPM to do that. What is that? We'll get into that in a few slides. But also, don't be seduced by an invasive invader. I know they're pretty. I know they might attract bees. I know they might attract butterflies. I know, you know, it's really easy to take care of. I know you keep yours in pots or just in that little area of your yard. This one I know firsthand. Yeah, but it was my mother's. It was my sister's. It was my friends. Those are all seductions that we fall for because we have an emotional attachment to plants, but we should also have an emotional attachment to our environment and our ecosystem and weigh out the greater good. So in managing these, here's the IPM I was talking about, integrated pest management. That's a pyramid that a lot of professional companies follow. First thing is prevention. That's not buying them to begin with. And we'll talk about cultural and sanitation. That means that digging it up, throwing it away so it can't spread elsewhere. What does physical or chemical or mechanical? Well, physical control includes hand pulling, burning. We have a burn ban right now. Don't do it right now. Dredging and shading over and 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 over again. This is not a one-time deal. Mechanical control is the use of specially made machines to harvest invasive plants by cutting and collecting them and transporting them to a place to decompose. If you're going to break some up and take it to Hernando County landfill, put a tarp over your truck so you're not spreading it all over the county between your house and the landfill. Biological control is the use of imported insects such as those air potato beetles, fish and other organisms that eat or infect or otherwise keep specific invasive plants at low levels indefinitely. Then that very last top of that pyramid, the smallest thing we should consider, we should do everything else first. We work from the bottom up, is chemical control. It's the use of specially formulated herbicides registered with the US EPA and FTAX to kill those specific plants. And I'll show you where you can find that information. Other ways we can manage pests responsibly. That's number 6 of the 9 principles of Florida friendly landscaping. As I just said, it's never a once and done procedure. Sometimes pull again. Sometimes cut, wait for new growth, treat with a chemical, various ways. But like I said, I pulled that Mexican petunia for 4 years. It's diligence that's going to keep it at bay. And eradication, eradication is probably not an attainable goal. So don't think it's all or nothing. Think management, not necessarily eradication. Also, other ways to manage pests properly: throw away with your household trash. Don't put it in the compost. It's so vigorous, it might start growing again from your compost. Consider burning it. We are in a burn ban right now. Do not do it right now until Hernando County authorities release us, out of the burn ban. But also, if you're allowed in where you live, and if the plant isn't toxic, if you set it on fire, you got to find those things out. And as I said, if you take it off to our landfill, make sure you cover the truck and also let the landfill people know what you have. Because if you have Brazilian pepper or white lead tree, they're not going, or even air potato, they're not going to want you to put it in their landscape pile. They're going to want you to put it in the trash cell, so it gets buried and can't reproduce again. Beware of the friendly neighbor. Beware of the friendly mother, the friendly sister who wants to share with you. Here are the danger words. You can't kill this. It just grows everywhere. I didn't even plant it. So, you know, those are words you want to question. Remember that sword fern I showed you? Oh yeah, my mother shared lots with me and I put it in my yard. And what is it? Angela Mayu. Anyway, she says, when you know better, do better. So that's what we're going to do with our yards and our plants as well. And also, even if they have great plants, good plants, native plants to give you, watch out for those hitchhikers that might be hiding in the pot with it or climbing up it that, you know, turn out to be invasive plants. Here are some resources. That FloridaInvasiveSpecies.org has so much information. I very much encourage you to look it up. And you can even find publications that are going to list chemical controls that you can do. You can find more lists at the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants. Again, don't be overwhelmed by the lists, because today we talked about plants you shouldn't have, and you may feel like, what plants are left? Well, the Florida friendly, oh, this is hard to see through our my filter here, but there's the Florida friendly landscaping guide to plant selection and landscape design. You can have all those plants. They're very nice plants. You can have many, many more. Look up Florida friendly landscaping. You'll find the guide. If you want a free one, contact me, a free book. I'll be glad to give you one. It's a great place to get started. And also you can go to the University of Florida's assessment of non-native plants in natural areas. Here, this address here is the Hernando County Extension Office. If you just want to go and talk to someone about control of these native plants, or I'm sorry, of these invasive plants, I want to know the process of controlling them. Give them a call at this number, 352-754-4433. You can talk to Dr. Lester, the horticulture agent. He's not always as available, especially by phone. You can email him, take pictures, lots of pictures. He loves pictures. And email W. Lester, Lester, at ufl.edu. He'll be glad to help you on your journey with these invasive plants, or call or stop by on a Thursday between like 8 and 3. Master Gardener Bernie's there. He's a huge help during those times as well. And here on the YouTube channel, well, it will be here for those who are listening from the YouTube channel, we have classes I did before this that would be a great follow-up for this program. 2 of them are This, Not That, This, Not That, and This, Not That Revisited, Replacing Problem Plants with Sustainable Solutions. So in that class, I show you, you know, don't have the coral ardesia, but do have the wild coffee. We go through each plant like that to give you options and opportunities. And we also have those pretty darn invasive plants where we talk about the emotional seduction and, you know, that we need to get out of those toxic relationships with those plants and move on to healthier ones. Thank you for joining me today. Again, you can email me at Hernando County FFL at hernandocounty.us. And I'm going to turn off the recording and I will address the chat. But thank you all for joining me, and I'm sorry I went a little bit over. So let's all go and get our lunch now. Thank you and have a great Florida friendly weekend.